As I mentioned in my every quote in Curly cameo video, the duo have a ton of neat touches in their details in the Blade Strangers cameo specifically. In this video, I'd like to touch on all the details and references in the game, including their movesets, individual story modes, and just other miscellaneous details that I think are neat. But before we get started, I do want to point out that for this video, I will be referring to Blade Strangers as Blaster from now on, as that's what the community has shortened the title down to, and it's a lot easier and faster to say. Now, before getting into the meat and potatoes of their cameo, let's go ahead and discuss some of the miscellaneous details that I was talking about. The first I would love to talk about is what I think is the most appealing, fair new design overhaul for the game. Taking a look at quote, I honestly wouldn't even know where to begin. Let's just go ahead and start with this cap, as that's the easiest detail to talk about. Fans of Cave Story can immediately see some differences with this hat compared to its canon design. First, his hat is entirely red this time around with the metal plate attached to the front by a metal ring. The metal plate itself has what appears to be bolts and one long metallic groove going across it, making it look like the hat has a silly face on it. This hat is, for the most part, fairly accurate to the original game. The main difference is that the metal plate on the hat usually appears stitched onto the hat already, rather than attached secondhand by a ring. Some people believe that the hat is supposed to have Curly Brace written on it, however this is only found in beta art, in which quote was supposed to have Curly's name. As for the official release, this isn't the case, but it is hinted at when you save Sue from Igor. She mentions that there is a form of writing on your cap in another language. Sadly, however, it's never said what quote's hat says. Speaking of quote's beta design, Daisuke and Maya actually often drew quote with gloves, however official art of detail seemingly had these glove removes. Hi, post-editing Coda here, and I just want to mention that when I did say that the gloves were removed in quote's official art, I do mean in Nicalis' official art for quote. However, you can still see quote's gloves in game in the ending illustrations. The next thing we can point out is that the design for quote's antenna has changed here. While different, it does still hold the yellow-green color scheme that the original does. Overall, this is a really nice design change. And finally, what I think helps this design look really freaking cool is the brand new pouch quote has, as well as King's blade being held in a holster. Moving on from design changes, we'll go straight into his color alts, starting with colors 7 and 8, which are references to Cave Story's difficulty select screen. Depending on which difficulty you choose, quote's color scheme will change, and color alts 7 and 8 are color schemes for easy and hard respectively. Moving on to quote's second alt, this alternate actually does remind me of quote's in-game Halloween color scheme. For those who may not know, Cave Story Plus will actually change the color schemes of characters in-game depending on when you play the game. During Halloween, quote's color scheme changes to red eyes with the dark blue hat and pants. Now, sure, Color Alt 3 doesn't have dark blue hats or red eyes, but the color scheme does seem to have the right idea of a spookier quote. I'm not sure if anybody else gets this vibe, maybe I'm crazy, but who knows. Either way, I'll always think it's a missed opportunity to not add reindeer quote with the red nose. That would have easily been my main color. Now as far as Color Alts 3 through 6, there actually isn't real reference that I can think of when it comes to these. While they are really neat and good alts, I don't believe they're referencing anything. My favorite does have to be Color Alt 6 though. And that's about it for quote's details, and moving on to Curly, we can immediately start with my favorite detail they added to Curly's antennas, and that's being turned into a headset. And oh my god, do I love this design for her. Actually, I just love this design. I need this headset. Seriously, if any of my viewers can customize headsets, I will gladly pay anybody whatever it takes to make this headset for me. It'll be nice to wear when I eventually make a video comparing Cave Story's different soundtracks. Anyways, bringing it back to Blaster, another detail they changed for Curly's design is her top. Curly Brace is usually portrayed wearing a red crop top, but they decided to give it a more sporty looking design, which makes sense given the context of a fighting game. And finally, compared to official Cave Story art, Curly actually has a different inventory pouch compared to her usual pouch she's portrayed with. It's a small detail, but I'd like to keep this video as definitive as possible. Speaking of details, the next fact I'd like to say is strictly only for the sake of pointing out as many details as possible. If you look close enough, yes, you can see Curly is wearing her infamous green panties. Fans of Cave Story may know that you could obtain Curly's panties as an optional item that will unlock Curly's story in any version of Cave Story Plus. You may have also noted that Curly's also wielding King's blade in a holster on her hip. Yes, she does use it in combat, and there is one detail that makes her blade much better than Quote's, but we'll get to that when we move into their movesets. For now, let's move on to Curly's alts, and just like Quote, Curly also has her easy and hard difficulty alternate colors, Set has her 7th and 8th colors. But after that, Curly doesn't really have much referential alternatives. Her color alt 2 is debatably a reference to Sue, but there's not much really to support it. If her hair was white, I would have gladly believed it. Color alts 3 through 6, your guess is as good as mine. Again, these alts are really nice, but I would have loved to see one referencing Misery. If you guys can point out any reference for these, please let me know in the comments. Moving on from the characters themselves, we do have 2 stages, one for each character. Curly's stage is the Deep Cave. This stage has a pretty inaccurate title as there is no deep cave location in Cave Story. There's the last cave and the first cave, but no deep cave. This stage is actually the Sand Zone, and you can see Jenka's puppies running around in the background. As for Quote, he does get the balcony, which is a wonderful stage, and I'm happy to say that they picked this over something like the first cave. I am a bit disappointed that we don't get to see Mimiga Village though. Being able to see Sue, Toriko, and Jack in the background would have been really nice. Hell, it would have been even better if they added Kampachi, aka the best Mimiga. And as for the final piece of miscellaneous info, we do have one more reference to a color alt, but it's not on Quote or Curly. Summer Kawase's 3rd color alt is a pretty straightforward reference to Curly Brace. Try not to get too distracted by its accuracy, okay? Finally, let's move on to the real juicy parts about their cameo, the movesets. I would like to start off by saying that, for the sake of this video, I'll only be looking at their skill or special moves. While there are some exceptions, their light, heavy, and unique attacks are just standard jabs and slashes for the most part. I will also be using numeric fighting game notations when referring to attacks. This makes it way easier to refer to. If you're unfamiliar with numeric fighting game notations, a simple Google search will help you out very easily. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and look at Quote. Starting out with Quote's 5S, we have the Blade Rush. Quote whips out King's Blade with 2 nice slashes that combo right into each other. His 5S Heavy will slash for even more damage and have him lunge forward just a little bit more at the cost of slightly more startup lag. And finally we have 5S EX, which will give Quote a 3rd slash. This move is actually an incredibly nice launcher during games and is quite an amazing combo move. This move is also really good mid-screen, but it does lose 200 damage at the cost of frame data being the exact same as the light variant. This move is great mid-screen, but it also does lose 200 damage compared to the heavy version. This does come with an upside though, as it does share frame data as the light version. One interesting detail with this move is that its animation seemingly does change Quote's weapon for no reason. Quote will instead swap out the Polar Star for the Fireball, which he doesn't use in this move. I guess he just pulls it out for style? Overall, it's just nice to see Quote using King's Blade as a special move. But there does seem to be missing something. Moving on to Quote 6S, we have his handy dandy Polar Star. It's a simple shot forward and surprisingly isn't even a projectile. The Polar Star actually functions as a blast from the gun rather than a projectile, however this move is still pretty damn good. His 6S Heavy adds a roll forward which does give Quote near full projectile invulnerability. This move has saved me from being cornered quite a lot and can be key against really specific matchups. I like to add this move mid combo for style over function. And finally we have 6S EX. This move has the same frame data as 6S, but will also give you a wall bounce if it hits the opponent in the corner. This move is really good for corner combos if that wasn't obvious. One move that isn't one of these specials but does belong in this family of skills is Quote 6 Heavy. Quote will twirl around his Polar Star in cowboy fashion and fire shortly after.
Ain't no town in the town for the town of us.
This move is really good for corner pressure and actually does have super armor if you fully charge it. Keep in mind the armor will not protect you from lows or grabs, but it's still really nice armor to have. This move also does have an aerial variant in the form of Jumping 5S. He angles his Polar Star downwards and forwards and then shoots in the style of the grounded version. His heavy version actually, scientifically confirmed, is the most stylish move in the game. Quote will jump forward and roll on the floor and stylishly shoot when the roll is complete. This move also does give you forward momentum, and if you jump backwards, you can cancel the backwards momentum with the forward roll that he does. Finally, the EX version of the move is the same as the light version, but if it does hit, it will force the opponent into a floor bounce. While it sounds good, trust me, you'll only need the heavy version of this move. It's both style and function. His next move to cover is his 2S, the Rising Blade. This move is basically a DP, but should not be used like a DP. It's incredibly unsafe, but the move itself is really cool. Quote will kick you up in the air and then slash you once. The 2S Heavy will kick you up, slash, and then follow up with a downward spike away from Quote. Finally, 2SEX. This move is one of my favorites in the game as far as usage. As standard, Quote kicks you up, but then he hits with a flurry of slashes from King's Blade and then spikes you down and away. This move, if cancelled at the right time, is amazing for combos, and I used it incredibly often. Bless this move. His fourth skill is 4S, the Fireball, a staple move for using Quote. This move is another one of my favorites, but purely for a different reason. I love this move as a Cave Story fan. The light version will fire off a level 1 fireball. His heavy variant will fire off level 2 fireballs. And you guessed it, 4SEX fires level 3 fireballs. This was a really nice detail for them to add, and I wish Quote's moves were more referential to Cave Story like this, but it is nice to see at least one move reference the game's leveling system at all. This move is also one of Quote's best. It's his only projectile, and it's key to being able to get in close with more slashes and jabs. His final skill is Blade Dive, or Jumping 2S. This skill is pretty neat, but it's not his best. Quote whips out the blade and then dives towards the floor. His heavy variant does the same, but you'll be diving at a wider angle, reaching just a tad further. Jumping 2SEX will actually force Quote to go through the opponent. While it seems nice, he does genuinely have better cross-up options. It is fun to do in rapid succession in training mode though. This move actually makes me wish they just added bubbles trailing Quote, so this way we could have said that this move is just a reference to the booster. Overall, I do think this move is meant to hint towards his booster, but we have no confirmation on what propels him downwards. And lastly, let's move on to Quote's ultra skills, or hypers, or supers, or whatever you'd like to call them. The first one he has is his rocket launcher, or the WMD. This move has Quote fire his rocket launcher angled forward yet slightly upwards. You could input the move twice to fire 2 rockets instead of just 1. This move isn't exactly the greatest. The level 1 variant can be easily avoided by low profiling or crouching with some characters, but the level 2 is slightly better as the second missile will hit low profilers, but overall, use this move as a combo finisher. His second ultra skill is the awkwardly named Blade Polar Star, and this move is amazing. This move hits right in front of and slightly above Quote, and when it lands, Quote will shoot and slash the running hell out of you with King's Blade and the Polar Star, ending with a huge slash upwards. The level 2 variant adds a lot more slashes and shots, but then instead of a final slash upwards, he'll hit you up and then fire a fully charged Spur Blast. That is a super move. The Spur Blast, of course, makes this move Quote's best, from a fan's perspective anyways. I love this ultra skill to death and can watch it over and over in training mode, but that does it for Mr. Traveler himself. Like I said earlier, this isn't Quote's entire moveset, and this is just his specials and referential moves to Cave Story. With that said, let's move on to Curly. Curly's entire moveset is a lot more fun, and like I said, has a much better blade than Quote's. In fact, let's finally start off with it. Curly, like Quote, also has Blade Slash as her 5S. The big difference is that the Blade Slash is that Curly will only take one big slash at the opponent. Her heavy Blade Slash, she lunges forward just a bit and takes a similar big slash at the opponent. Now you might be thinking, Coda, you said that Curly's blade was much better than Quote's. How? You've been hyping up this move for so long. How could it possibly live up to the hype? Well, I'll tell you how. Curly's blade slash EX will summon King's spirit, and King will slash at the opponent multiple times. And that's it. I know it doesn't seem like much, but I wanted to cry seeing this move purely because I thought that there would be a ton of fan service like this. In fact, a lot of people would say Curly's appearance has much more fan service than Quote, but this claim is purely based off of her blade and ultra skill. We'll go ahead and get to that later. One move I would like to get out of the way is Curly's 4S, and this move is just like Quote's, that being the Fireball. Her Fireball works in the same way, with each variant being based on the different levels in Cave Story. Moving on, we have Curly's 6S, the Machine Gun. This move is Curly's main jam. You'll be using this move and its variants a lot. Speaking of variants, Machine Gun is more than just her 6S. It's also her 8S, Jumping 5S, and Jumping 2S. All of her Machine Gun moves have similar mechanics when using the Heavy and EX variants. The difference is the amount she shoots. The light variant shoots 4 bullets, the heavy shoots 6, and the EX shoots 8. Both her jumping variants do carry a little special trait though. Her aerial shots do push Curly with the slight force. With this said, if you're moving backwards and say use Jumping 5S Machine Gun EX, you will be completely launched backwards. Over halfway across the screen actually. The momentum she gained is, of course, a reference to the machine gun itself being able to act like a jetpack of sorts. A really cute touch for Curly that wasn't needed, but it is great to help her zoning nature in Blaster. The final skill we have for Curly is her WMD. Yes, Quote's Ultra skill is just a regular skill for Curly. This move has Curly crouch and fire the missile launcher up and off screen. Shortly after, the missile will fall and explode. The light and heavy variants work semi-similarly. The light drops the missile close to Curly and the heavy drops the missile about mid-screen length away. The EX variant of the move will actually lock onto the opponent and drop wherever the opponent is currently at on the stage. Well, if the missile launcher is just her regular skill, what's her ultra skills? You might be asking. Well, good question with the slightly disappointing answer. Her first ultra skill is the upgraded orange missile launcher from Cave Story. Quote completely got cheated with this move, as the Super WMD can be fired mid-air at a downwards angle. The main difference with Quote and Curly's WMD is the angle they shoot. We know that Quote fires forward and slightly upwards, meanwhile Curly can just fire her straight forward. In the air, she fires it forward and downwards. Moving on to her second ultra skill, we have the last move we'll be covering for this video, and it's the 8-bit striker. Curly Brace will hit you off screen and chase you down, but will appear with her pixelated style from Cave Story Plus. The Collins are also with her for this super. She then guns you down with a ton of machine gun shots and finishes you off with a powered up missile launcher shot. This ultra skill is honestly super cute, and its upgraded version of course makes it so much better. The upgraded version honestly feels really passive, and it has the Collins and Curly walk on screen like normal, but then Curly will get scared and everybody runs from a giant mob of bats, critters, behemoths, Spasu, power critters, and Gotti, all of which damage the opponent instead. This will always end up with Curly on the opposite side of when she used the ultra skill, i.e. if you use this move facing left, the move will end with Curly facing right. And finally, that's it for their movesets. Let me tell you, this was honestly the hardest part of the video, as I constantly had to analyze the same move over and over in game, making sure I had it right, or at least the closest way I can describe them, but it's all worth it for the sake of detail appreciation. Next, let's move on to their story modes. Both Quote and Curly have some fairly different story modes. Let's switch it up and start with Curly. I actually believe Curly has the better story mode of the two. Curly's story mode strangely starts off with a quote, no pun intended. The quote itself reads, "There is an infinite number of parallel worlds, and they are all being simulated," from Sir Paul Cartiano. This is actually just a quote I got randomly generated for her playthrough. Each character seemingly gets a random quote. After playing the story mode, I got the same quote for a few characters. In fact, Curly just doesn't share the same random quote, she also shares the exact same story as half the cast. Basically, when looking at the character select screen, the entire first 2 rows of characters have the exact same story mode. The third row, minus Lena, share a story mode. And then the DLC characters all have their own unique story modes. Lena, being the boss of the game, also has her own unique story mode. So then you might be asking, if Curly's story mode is shared across the cast, how is it so special? Well, allow me to tell you. First, let me TLDR you on the Blade Stranger's story. Basically, a world-eating robot named Lena gets hungry and wants to eat the worlds of each Blade Stranger. Luckily, a bunch of robots called motes, which oversee a ton of different worlds, pull every stranger into one place to decide who will be the Blade Stranger. How do they decide this? By having every stranger fight each other, of course. Apparently, when being pulled out of your own world, it will cause a ton of different feelings and defenses and even slight memory loss. So to keep each stranger calm, they will tell them that they're in a fighting tournament with just the desire to win. Curly believes that every contender is after the Mimiga and that by winning, she has successfully protected them. After playing a few fights, the main boss Lena interrupts the tournament and of course you have to fight her. This isn't done normally though. Soon, a giant robot woman named the Goddess Exiva comes to the tournament and basically inspires the fighter you're playing as. To inspire Curly, Exiva actually goes into the world of Cave Story, specifically during the Living Waterway section of the game. To inspire Curly, Exiva actually goes into the world of Cave Story, specifically during the Living Waterway section of the game. Here, we can actually see what Curly is thinking about while passed out, claiming that she feels flooded with water and doesn't have much time to live. Eventually, a light appears and it's Exiva there to tell her that she can be strong enough to survive and protect the Mimiga. Curly then wakes up and screams out Quote's name. Now, purely off the fact that she screams Quote's name is what makes pinpointing this moment tough. The only time Curly screams Quote's name is when you give her Ma Pig Non to refresh her memories, not after you deflood her. Either way, this moment is still really neat just because we get to see some insight on what Curly was thinking during the Living Waterway section. Of course, this isn't canon, shouldn't be overthought about anyways, but still, neat to think about nonetheless. We end the story mode with Curly winning the fight with Lena and then gaining the power to travel through time and infinite universes. For those who watched my Cave Story timeline video, you'll know that I lightly talked about this story mode and said that these were the powers given to Quote. Well, sorry to burst any bubbles, but everybody gets these powers after defeating Lena. Speaking of Quote, let's move on to his story mode, and it begins right when Goddess Exiva needs to inspire the current Blade Stranger, who I guess you can say is canonically Solange. Solange fails and the modes prepare Quote as a plan B. Quote makes it through the whole tournament, beats Lena, and is granted the powers I stated before. That's it. No special cutscene of Exiva having to inspire Quote or move forward or use any special token of appreciation. After all the Blade Strangers fail, Quote comes in, beats Lena, and then gets out of there. What a Chad. Finally, getting into the last detail, Quote and Curly are actually voiced in this game. Curly is voiced by an actress named Chihiro Yamamoto, and Quote is voiced by Soihei Horikane, both who do an excellent job. Chihiro Yamamoto is actually quite a famous actress in Japan, known for her roles in the Kamen Rider movies. Quote's voice actor is actually quite the mystery of the man. From my research, he's only ever been in Blade Strangers, which is kinda disappointing as he has quite the vocal cords, if I do say so myself. I wouldn't mind hearing his voice in some anime, that's all I'm saying. For the first and only voice actor for Quote, he did a really good job, and I genuinely wouldn't mind if he was canonically Quote's voice. And with that said, we have finally covered Quote and Curly's cameo in Blade Strangers. Honestly, there were way more details than I thought when this idea first came into my head. I would like to thank the Mizumi Wiki for having most of the sprites and data on the moves, as well as the Blaster Discord for having even more data on the moves for the robots. While I would love to make videos this long for my regular content, it will probably be a while before I make another one this long. And I'll stick to more niche topics that people might not know about. Who knows, maybe my next video will be the Crystal Crisis cameo. Either way, until the next video, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. If you made it this far, tell me your opinions on Balrog, I don't know. It's 4 AM and I need sleep. Nerdieo is out.